So very good to have you here, James. Very
Thanks.
good indeed.
Good to be here.
So let's start with the Tolstoy. Why you chose the Tolstoy?
It's a very long book, as you know, and it's divided into chapters and into books. That was not the bit.
Oh, wasn't it?
That was chapter 4. I think it was book 4, chapter 4. That I and the reason
that was the wrong bit.
I mean, no, but that was great. I mean, it's all great. The danger is that I can sit here and talk about Anna Karenina for several hours. So please stop me if that's what I seem to be starting to do. A bit like you actually. I read it first when I went to university at the age of 17. It was the wrong book to be reading because I was there to do an English course, and I immediately embarked on a very long Russian novel. And like you, it didn't mean all that much to me then, because I hadn't lived really. I was just a boy, and not only was Tolstoy older and a man of the world, but he grew up earlier as well. Apart from the fact he was a great writer. But I do remember there were two things that I remember from that book when I read it then. One was the moment where Karenin, Anna's husband, Anna's lawful husband, knows that she is having an affair with Vronsky, the cavalry officer, and she's promised that she wouldn't receive him at their house anymore, but she does, and he doesn't know what to do. And he's very angry, but there's a part of him that also wants to forgive her and avoid the conflict, and so he talks about carrying his anger like a teacup that he doesn't want to spill over. That was in the original.
In the one that you chose.
Just because that's what I remember. The other thing I remember from reading it back then is, in after all that I've said, that I didn't really understand it and it didn't really stick with me. I was still arrogant enough to turn my nose up at the heavy-handed symbolisms that seemed to be then of Vronsky riding this beautiful horse to death at the horse race scene towards the end of the novel. I thought, so ham-fisted. And then more recently, I read it again in English, and then more recently than that, I read it again in Russian. All right, I didn't get quite to the end in Russian. I still have to look up a few words in every page.
I didn't get to the end in Russian either.
But,
didn't get to the start.
I mean, any extract you could have read would have made me would have sparked off thoughts in me. I mean, hearing about Dolly, who is married to Stiva, the brother of the woman that Levin marries, Alyovin. It's one of the extraordinary things about the book. I mean, it's a biographical detail, so in a way, it's a bit of a cheat to talk about the book because it's outside the book. It's Tolstoy's life, but it is extraordinary that he portrayed his wife as two separate characters in the book. He portrayed her both as Kitty, the young woman, a very young woman who the Tolstoy type character married, and as this much older, hassled, harassed, careworn mother who heroically looks after her many children in spite of all her husband's bad behaviour. So he manages to portray, even as in the course of the book, in his life, he was actually becoming much more misogynistic. He still was a great enough writer and an honest enough human being to portray all the women in the book so honestly. So when you talk about influence of writers on other writers, it's an interesting question. What is influence? There are many writers I would love to be influenced by, but I can't make them kind of shine on me and glow with their light. There are writers whose style is extremely sticky, and if you read, for example, somebody like Hemingway or Kellman or even Proust, while you are writing another novel, you find, my God, I've just written a sentence that covers a whole page. Why is it? Oh, I was reading Proust last night. So that's another kind of influence, which again is not really necessarily leading you to a place that you want to be. To admire a writer, to read many of their works, is not necessarily to be able, for somebody else to be able to see that work reflected. Only the writer perhaps will know the small ways, or the deep ways in which it's influenced. But there is another possibility, and this was how I approached Anna Karenina the last time I read it, which is, quite sort of humbly and openly, you say effectively to Tolstoy, "Be my teacher. Let me try and find the lessons that I can. Let me try and understand how it is you do the things that I most like in your book." And it is, I don't know how far I got, because once you get down to that level, once you start trying to make a great writer your teacher, once you start trying to learn and you try and work out what he's doing, it's extraordinarily difficult. It is the wonder of prose, of prose fiction, that there are only 26 letters in the alphabet, there are only so many words in the dictionary. It's all there on the page. It's not like when you listen to an orchestra and you don't know exactly what the fiddle player is doing, or what the violinist is doing, what the trombone player is doing. You don't know all the techniques, you don't know all the behind the scenes stuff. With the book, it's all there. It should be all there, and yet somehow how he does these things, and the kind of technique I'm talking about, for example, is something that builds up gradually as you go through Anna Karenina. Point of view, where you have access to the thoughts of the character. You see the world through their eyes, from their point of view. In the beginning, you're seeing it through this relatively minor character, Stiva. Everyone knows the first line of Anna Karenina: all happy families are alike, all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. That's actually the Oblonsky family. It's not either the Karenins or the other main character in the book, the Lyovins. And you see it in the first few chapters. You see it from Stiva's point of view, Stiva Oblonsky. And then there's a certain moment where he's in his office, he's a bureaucrat, he's in his office, and Lyovin comes up the stairs. And it's almost as if the sort of the football of perspective is passed from Stiva to Lyovin. And then you see the world through Lyovin's point of view in the beginning of the next chapter. Well, that's quite a standard routine thing in novels. I mean, in modern times, it's become very fashionable to write a novel from a single point of view. But it's also not that uncommon to do the sequential thing. But then it gets more interesting when in a single chapter, Tolstoy will start to hop from one person to another and give you alternately the point of view of this or that character, whose point of view he has already introduced sequentially, but now it's going in parallel. It's very difficult to do, very difficult to pull off. As I say, even though I've tried to understand how he's doing it, it's not. I'm not sure that I've succeeded, but I certainly tried. And then you get to another level of complexity where you're adding this narrative voice, who is not either of the characters, not any of the characters, but is the narrator, is this sort of godlike figure. And that's where what I was trying to do in The Heartbroken Inn was to have this little space between the point of view of the characters and the point of view of the narrator, where every now and again this space would open up and the narrator would tell you something about the characters that the characters did not know about themselves. That again turned out to be much more difficult than I thought, simply because if you are making a statement, a judgment about your characters, particularly in 2016, where we're so sensitive to the ideas of judgment and saying something absolute about somebody, it can sound terribly pompous. Even though you might think as the writer you're in complete control, you're not. There are limits and you have to do it right. It's hard.
So with Tolstoy, reading the People's Act of Love, it felt almost like Tolstoy novel as if Tolstoy had lived into the revolution, as if he'd lived through all that, into the revolution. I mean, for instance, got this, I don't know what I can say, it's got a wonderful sex scene. I mean, there's not much sex in it, but it's a beautifully written scene on the train. And there's this incredibly emblematic scene of the horses falling out of the carriage at the start, which is weird and terrifying. And then this fabulous description of going into war on the horse and the sound of the guns and so on. And even a kind of Tolstoyan kind of religious epiphany that the main character has near the end.
Well, you're very kind. I mean, I after that, I want to agree with you, but I'm not sure I do. There is a particular... just again, a biographical detail. I don't know to what extent the audience has read The People's Act of Love, but it is about communism, cannibalism, castration, and love. And there was...
You don't get that castration.
And there was this extreme Christian sect in Russia in the 19th and early 20th century, which did believe in the castration of men as a way to achieve the ultimate separation of soul and body, to be pure enough to relate to angels and heavenly beings and God in an absolute way. And at the very end of his life, just before he ran away from home as a very old man, Tolstoy did travel a very long way, like I think 30 miles, on a horse to meet a neighbour in his area who was one of these people, and had long conversations with him. He also wrote a short story in which a monk is sexually tempted by a visitor, a female visitor, and he finds himself yielding to temptation. So he goes to the back of the place where he's living, he takes an axe and he chops off his little finger, just to sort of, both to try and bring himself back to the world of restraint, but also to make the woman realise how serious this all is. So to that extent, in terms of ideas and thinking, yes, I guess there is I was thinking about those things when I wrote the book. But in terms of style, I don't feel it's terribly Tolstoyan. I mean, it's interesting that you say it's as if he lived through those times. I mean, there's something very generic about war, and he did live through extraordinary times. I mean, he lived through terrible times enough. He lived through famine. He experienced war in the Caucasus and in Crimea, and he had some terrible experiences with deaths within his own family, both of his own children and of his brothers. So in terms of generic experiences, he didn't lack it. But as I say, it's not really that style. And as I say, these things are generic, and there's more than you might know in the book that I took from moments that I experienced in Russia. Cool. But also, I mean, there's a bit in the book where the characters, this cavalry officer, you flash back to the First World War. The cavalry officer does actually have a great fear of the sound of guns, and at one point he's riding past a line of guns, and they go off, and he doesn't realise that they are shooting out. He thinks that somebody is shooting at him. And there was a time in Iraq when something very similar happened to me, that we were driving along in the middle of the night in a convoy, and we couldn't see anything except the lights of the vehicle in front of us, and suddenly there was this huge series of explosions next to us, and we thought we were being attacked, but it was just a line of American guns firing outwards. So you can take something from what seems to be a completely different context and put it into your own book.
I mean, carrying on with influences for a minute, I slightly, even when it was with The Heart Broke In, I wondered whether you were influenced by Dickens, in as much as you've got a novel with lots of different characters, very, very finely sketched characters, quite a dramatic sweep of epic sweep, also comedy, also a very strong concern with morals. I don't know whether Dickens is an influence.
Well, if you say it seems Dickensian, then I can't argue with you. It doesn't.
No, indeed.
It doesn't seem particularly Dickensian to me. I mean, I did think one of the things that happens, I suppose it's one of the things you have to avoid when you write a book which has a certain success. You get invited for the first time to do events like this. And you can't help every now and again when you're writing the book. You think, I bet I got asked about that in one of these events. And of course, you think, I know I mustn't think that, suppress that thought. Don't think, how does this joke sound in German? Don't think about those things. Just write the book. But of course, when I was writing a book, and it was, as you say, very consciously a London novel, I did think, I wrote a book about Russia. Everyone talked about Tolstoy. I wrote a book about London. Everyone will talk about Dickens. And I did cross my mind, but it just didn't seem particularly Dickensian to me. And there are a number of occasions when I suppose it is Dickensian in that sense that you have these characters coming in and then going out again.
Yes.
And I do take some trouble to describe and characterise and bring to life characters whose lifespan is very, very short. They're just sort of vignettes.
Yes, that's right.
And that could be Dickensian, but I don't think it is in the way that I've done it. I mean, the example I'm thinking of is Beck's mother, who flies in from Spain, and she's a widow. She's quite sort of right wing. She's a classic expat living in the south of Spain. She even though she's left the country herself, she thinks her own country's going to dogs. But her time in the book only lasts for a few pages.
I mean, she's so vivid, you rather expect her to become a major character.
Well, maybe she should have. But anyway, but I think if it had been Dickens, the difference is that his characters always interact much more with the other characters, rather than Dickens sort of diving into the consciousness of the person. There'll be much more a theatrical exchange. The person will render their inner self through speech, as well as through appearance. Less so through Dickens sort of diving inside their head and telling you about their past.
I see. So let's move on from influences, although we could go on for on. But I just thought let's just start with, carry on with, when did writing first enter your life? And, I read an interview, I can't remember where now, where you bought a typewriter. And
my mother bought a typewriter on the strength of a promise from me that I would clean the windows for 3 months. Not continuously, but regularly for 3 months, and I did clean them once, most of them.
And she bought you the typewriter.
She did buy me the typewriter, and that typewriter stood me in good stead for a long time. I started out in the non-computer era, and I mean, in those days. My ideas were pretty primitive. I thought, once I get a typewriter, that'll be the main problem sorted. Writing a book, and of course, it's funny, but at the same time, in the same way that people do love messing around with their fonts and making the layout of their texts look just so, it is not entirely to be sneered at kind of confidence that you get from just seeing your work in neat. Printed words. It's that little step towards it actually being printed. I mean, and circulated as a book. These days, there's a much more fluid set of boundaries, of course, you can type something into the internet, and if it's the right thing, then 20 million people will be reading it 5 minutes later. But before that happened. It was one of the few intermediary stages between writing something down and having it published was the typewriter. And I've never, not since those early days, have I ever tried to actually compose on the typewriter in that sort of romantic American
American way. I've never quite worked out whether American writers of the 20th century wrote from scratch on typewriters because this was better, or just because they knew that other people did it, and this was, this is the kind of cool thing that you did. Now, typewriter is a quaint artifact. I remember reading recently how some people went past Cormac McCarthy's room in whatever university he has a teaching post in, and they saw this thing and they said, "What's that? What's that? This mysterious typesetting object." But that wasn't what you asked about, was it? I'm raving on about typewriters, and you asked
when
about...
When did you start writing?
I think I was trying to deflect the question, which is actually much more difficult, about when I've always written, and I do remember saying, when I was 12, I think, in school, in answer to a teacher's question, I want to be an author. But the thoughts around that, I don't know. I can't provide you with the sort of thinking, what it was that made me want to do that, except that I felt it was something I could do. And I would say that there were many stages on the way to being a better writer. When you're a writer, you're always in the state of becoming. There was certainly a definite stage in my mid-teens when I felt I became much more sensitized to beauty and the richness of the world. It was the first stage of becoming somebody who was entirely occupied with his own strange inner thoughts, and began to apply those thoughts to the world, and to allow the world to imprint on me, and to try and think of the words to describe that. But then much time passed. And
there was journalism in that time, presumably.
Yes. I mean, in the beginning, journalism was just a way to make a living. And also, I think it's true to say that I was quite consciously trying to do a job that would give me experience of the world. I was quite a shy person, and I felt that whether I liked it or not, doing this would force me to do difficult things, to encounter people, to have meetings. I remember the very first time I sat in a newspaper office, needing to cold call somebody who didn't know me, who had never spoken to me before. But it was just an office. It wasn't somebody at home, their home number. But I sat there for half an hour, terrified of making this call and having to introduce myself and ask this impertinent question. And then 8 years later, I was calling people up and saying, how do you feel about the fact your daughter's just been killed by a rhinoceros? Terrible, but I did become much more cold-blooded about it. But I did have, it did sort of open the door to again engaging more with the world. But much later on, outside the world of journalism, for many years I kind of very carefully kept these worlds separate. I sort of tried to restart when I was writing The People's Act of Love. It was the beginning of this idea I had that I had not been careful enough, I had not been thoughtful enough about what I was doing. That it wasn't enough just to rely on your basic facility for writing and to hope that would be fine. You had to face up to the writers who you admired and tried to see what was the nature of that difference between you and them when your work was finished. Because before The People's Act of Love, there were 4 works of fiction, 2 novels and 2 collections of short stories, and it was only really with the short stories that came out in 2000, the Museum of Doubt, that I began to feel I was getting somewhere. But also I began to feel I needed more help from the writers I liked. There is an attitude that, well, sometimes there's a biographical moment where
you'll read an interview with a writer and they'll say something like, I was reading such and such, I realised I could do better than that. And I don't think that's the kind of writer you want to be reading. You should stop at that point and look for the writers who you think, I'm not as good as this writer. Why is that? I want to be as good in my own way as they are. And what is the difference between me and them? So although self-consciousness is often bandied about as a great criticism of writers, and I understand that. Still, there is an aspect of writing where I think, especially once you're out of that youthful energy, vitality, you do need to start becoming craftier and more thoughtful, and to learn how to bring together all the different strands of your conscious experience.
And part of that, was that part of your war correspondent? Did that, obviously, I mean, I know lots of people ask you this, but you've seen lots of things that
I've never described myself as a war correspondent, and I never would. To me it's quite a specific expression. It's somebody. There are still a few people like this. This is what they do all the time. They just cover wars. I've never been that kind of person. I have gone to report on wars, but if you added all the time together that I'd done it, it wouldn't be more than 6 months in my life. So I'd like to sort of make some difference between me and the real war correspondence. And in terms of influence on my writing, I think it's still unfolding. And I think I will keep returning to some of those experiences. But it's wrong to assume that a war that you have been in some sense, is going to be the most intense experience you've ever had. That's not necessarily the case at all. I remember doing an event like this many years ago, and I was talking to some of the other writers beforehand, and some of the writers had brought their spouses along, and there was this very fresh-faced, jolly guy. He had this really innocent face, as if nothing bad had ever touched it. And I was talking to him, and I asked what he did, and his job was he was a surgeon who specialised in face cancer. I don't know if that's the correct term, but cancers which affect the face. So basically, he had to constantly be meeting people and looking at them and thinking, how am I going to cut your face open in such a way that I do you the least harm? And telling them about this. I can't imagine anything more extreme and horrible and the kind of thing that you might expect to leave a great scar on your own face just from the difficulty of doing it. And I think he put his hand up at one point when I was on stage and asked me about being a war correspondent, and I was thinking, you're out of your head, Alex. You're the one who is the war correspondent, and the war of life is always going to be the most intense one. I mean, it would be different if it had been a war in my own country, if bombs had been dropping on my family's house and killing them, or if I'd seen friends maimed, which of course some war correspondents have. But I suppose I've been lucky in the sense that I've never actually seen anyone being killed. I've never lost a close friend, and I've never been hurt myself physically. So it's yes, I would not attempt to list all the things that have left the deepest traumatic impression on me, but they wouldn't all be from the wars.
I mean, the other thing one of the things I wanted to draw out of, particularly The Heart Broke In, and it's true of both of the novels, but is a terrifically vivid. I was rereading James Wood recently, and he talks about serious noticing, which I really like that phrase. Having an eye for detail and an ability to notice well and seriously is how he puts it. And I thought that was very, very striking of, both the novels. The Heart Broke In is this capacity to notice well and seriously, and that serious noticing isn't just I've noticed this, noticed that. But there's something of wisdom about that, or there's something about what you select to notice, which has to work so hard. Can you say something about that aspect of that novel? I mean, there's so much of that in Heartbroken, what I would call serious noticing.
Yes, good. That's what I would hope. And of course, you're absolutely right in everything you say. That it is the telling detail, and not necessarily the visual detail. That it might be a sound or a smell or something tactile, just put in the right place. And there is nothing more wonderful than one of those rare writers who has this special skill of their imagination enters a space and the words fly to the things they describe. That's quite rare, and I seldom have that sort of ease, that quick facility with a whole space. And there is a question of, I mean, implicitly, what you've said when the way you described it, I don't know whether James Wood was making the same point. Implicitly, there's an idea that you are remembering something, that you had an experience, that you went somewhere, you noticed something, and you sort of put it away in a little shelf marked useful for novel, and then put it in. But if instead you create a generic imaginative space and then artificially populate it with things that you have seen in some way, but one was here and one was there, and you think, well, this is the things that would bring this idealized place to life, because after all, that's what you are doing with fiction. You are constantly creating these idealized spaces, idealized characters. I don't mean good, I mean just in some sense mythical and generic. So it's an interesting question. What is the act of noticing? Is it, as I say, memory? Is it a memory of a whole space? Is it memory of the detail, which you then put in your invented space? Or is it actually even more fictional than that? Is it something that you've never actually seen, but you've put it together from smaller and smaller pieces? There are differences between writers. Some writers, I think, really are remembering everything, and their books are reorganized sequences and spaces that they have actually been in, literally. But there are other writers who have to make things from smaller components, and I would say I was one of them. That I remember much, but if there is a talent in appearing to notice things, it's in being able to pull all these many elements together to create a kind of a mythical ideal space, which seems to the reader like a real and plausible space. So it's choosing in a way, as much as noticing.
I mean, the other thing I found from that is that what makes a novel so enjoyable is that serious noticing, and the weight of the noticing, whether the noticing feels kind of has a point, not a point in a kind of ideological sense, but somehow is intrinsic to the story. But the other thing I was thinking, particularly with The Heartbroken, is you seem to be a novelist who is trying to actually write a novel of ideas, and at the same time, and in this way, I thought you did remind me of Tolstoy, that with big ideas, but also want it to be a page turner. So often with the writers of ideas, you think, even Tolstoy at times you ask him to please be quiet about some of them, especially in War and Peace. But anyway, that's another matter. Shut up about history is what you want to say to him at some point.
Yes.
But you seem to want to very much unify. There's lots of big ideas. It's about science, about God, about morality, about love. There's a lovely writing of romance, particularly. So you want big ideas, but you also want thriller, almost an action. Very difficult to unify the two together. How?
It is. Yes, that is why it takes years and years to write these things.
because that is one of the biggest things you're trying to do. I mean, it's there's also the question of when you're trying to express ideas, are you embodying them in the things that people do, which is often held up as an ideal in creative writing classes, show don't tell. Or are you putting them into the mouths of the characters? Or are you doing this thing which usually seems so pompous, namely to put it in the voice of an omniscient narrator? These are all decisions that have to be made, and once they are made, you often find that, it's all very well to make the decision, but then when you actually try and do it, it doesn't work. Yeah. So you have to go back again and make changes. I mean, and those changes are almost always in the direction of shrinking the expression of ideas, away from the speech towards the throwaway remark, and away from some grand and obviously symbolic scene towards something that's a bit more subtle. I mean, for instance, but you have to start with the big loud thing before you get to the quiet. I mean,
there's that little scene. The scene that's coming to mind as we're talking about it is that scene at the party where they look at the traffic in London and talk about the human cell. Because the other thing about the Heartbroken, it seems to want to be a macrocosm and a microcosm. So it goes over the world and then goes into the human cell. It also, it reminded me of something that Forster said, I think, about how in the novel you want to get, not the Forster managed this, but how you might want to get everything in. Someone was talking to him about sex, and he said, you've got to get everything in. And there's a sense, particularly in The Heartbroken, where you really want to get everything in. So it's at times laugh out loud, very funny. It's also very romantic, and a thriller, and at times really quite frightening. It's fully vicious. Characters behave viciously. Is that what you're trying to get everything in?
Well, I think you're constantly saying to yourself, James, you can't get everything in. So I don't. I think I only put in what I felt was necessary, and everything that's in there is the result of an unfolding of the original idea. Tries to remember what original idea was. It's so kind of deep down in the book, but the original idea was. I was just thinking about why it was that religious families seem to have more children than non-religious families. And
it's the obvious idea for the beginning of a novel.
No, but that's the thing. I wasn't really thinking about a novel. I was thinking just that thought. And at the point at which it became the seed for a novel was when I started thinking. What about somebody, what is... I didn't like this thought. I didn't like the way it was going. And I didn't like the kind of person that I was becoming by thinking this thought. And then me thinking about the kind of person I was thinking this thought then became a character who has this thought. So I sort of, I gave birth to this character. And I thought, what kind of person would that be? Perhaps a sort of somewhat Richard Dawkins-like militant atheist scientist who had this idea that it was terribly important for atheists to have children in order to kind of balance things out, to make sure that the believers weren't going to take over the world. And then that became two characters. And then I wanted to have a character who... then the idea was, well, why does it matter whether a believer or a non-believer has children? Well, from the point of view of both parties, it's because you want to bring children up in the way that you believe is right, and whether it's a sort of liberal atheist child or a child who's a Christian or a Buddhist, then you want them to have your moral view on the world. So I then had to set up a character who was just good, just a good person. Not one of these militant people, one way or the other, but somebody who was a good person. So then there was that character. And then I wanted a counterpoint to her, to Beck, who was a bad character.
Yes,
her brother. And that group of four became the four key characters in the novel. And everything else just unfolded from that. It's like a sort of little thing. You think, oh, fold this out, and unfold that, and the next thing you know, you've got a 350-page novel. 550 pages. Is it?
Yeah. Well, in this.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, moving to the end of our interview, but the thing as well about The Heart Broke In, there's a very serious concern with morals. In fact, both the two novels I've written, The People's Act of Love and The Heart Broke In, it's a driving theme, is the nature of good and evil. There's almost a Nietzschean kind of concern with the foundations of morals. That, in The Heart Broke In, there's a moral foundation, and one of the striking things about it is a violence done through the internet, that effectively the destroying of people through the internet. But yes, I think that even a character says that talks about an absence of moral foundation or compass, and both novels seem to have this concern with morality.
Yes.
Is that
no, absolutely. I mean, that was very overt in the Heart Broke In, and really quite overt in The People's Act of Love as well.
Yes.
And indeed, in We Are Now Beginning Our Descent, which was the book that came between those two, there is a concern with. The themes of We Are Now Beginning Our Descent is more to do with imagination and the perils of. So I suppose, I'm hesitating here because I'm thinking, are there novels that are not, in some sense, about morality? You feel it's more overt in my novels than in others.
It feels like a driving concern, a real question that forms some of the drama of the characters, but also that gives the novels their human depth. Because surely our human depth comes from how we behave, especially in relationship to each other.
The Heart Broke In is it's more to do with doing the right thing.
Yes.
In the context of this modern world. The People's Act of Love is much more about doing the right thing in a much, much more extreme way.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And the contrast there is not so much between people who do the right thing, people who do the wrong thing, as between people who commit extreme acts in the name of virtue, and people who try to hold it all together without taking refuge in terrorism or castration. For most people, taking refuge in castration is
not so
quite easy to avoid.
Partly the People's Act of Love is about the dangers of extreme idealism and the cruelty that can come out of that. Beck and indeed Harry in is it Harry, that right? Yeah. In The Heart Broke In, they're images of goodness, aren't they? Of people who are trying to genuinely act.
Yeah, but Harry is a much more mixed character because he behaves very badly in so many ways.
Very likeable though.
Yes, I hope so. He's the comedian. It's also about the particular manifestation of, or a particular sort of reflection of doing the right and doing the wrong thing, which is the difference between doing something when you're motivated for personal reasons and doing something motivated for sort of corporate political reasons or idealistic reasons. That there's a very strong contrast in The People's Act of Love between people who are motivated by religious belief and or the belief in a golden communist future on the one hand, and people who more strongly believe that in the life of the here and now, my child must be protected, my family is important, why don't you love me? So that was the contrast that I was trying to do in the People's Act of Love. And to some extent that is carried over into The Heart Broke In, that going beyond these ideas of doing the right thing, there are different motivations. People do the right thing because that is what the good book says, or people do the right thing just because they have some gut feeling that that it is right. Yes, I mean, in The Heart Broke In, I had been quite hard on the Christians in a way. I mean, you could see it that way in the sense that there is this very evangelical family, another one of these sort of briefly outlined character sets. One of the central characters' brothers is an evangelical Christian, but I tried to counterpoint that. I tried to counterpoint their very, very strong belief that every word of the Bible is a literal truth with what seems to be a willful determination by the great atheist Harry to judge everyone according to that same set of beliefs rather than how they actually are.
So we need to round up, but I always ask this to our guests. What a difficult question, but what are novels for? It seems to me more and more sort of living a life through the screen. What are novels for, and are they still valuable for us?
Yes, they are, and I'll tell you why. It is strange because it really is still the only art form that creates the very strong illusion in you of a second time taking place. That you watch a film, you can't sort of you can, but it's not the same. You put it down, you pick it up again a few weeks later. With a novel, once you get into it, it's as if there's a second pulse, a second organization of the passage of time, which is taking place. No other art form does that, and what that means, what carries it over from a sense of there being another time, is the sense of there being other lives lived apart from yours, which in a way that other art forms don't, and in a way that simply imagining in a sort of rightful way, yes, I sympathise with these poor hungry people in this or that country, or isn't it terrible what's happening here, or isn't it it's terrible what happened to that woman when she lost her child. The novel actually creates in you this sense of the passage of time in others. And so instead of you marching on through time, the trackless wastes of time, just alone, you look to one side, you look to the other, and you see that there are others who are on that same journey with you. And it anchors you more firmly in the movement of all humanity, and not just your sense. It's an anti-solipsistic, anti-selfishness.
So would you think in that sense then that the novel has a moral kind of function?
Well, if you want to put it that way, it sounds
sounds terribly moral,
terribly sort of weighty and burdensome. But no, I think it's more of a liberating thing. That there is an opening out and the possibility to enter into and share the idea of the lives of others in a way that no other art form can quite do.
That's a great place to finish. Thank you very much, James Meek.